Okay, today I'm going to talk about economic policy. What is economic policy? The first thing to answer. Economic policy is what the government uses to control the economy. Remember, we've got a free market, so there's not much control, but it's a mixed system. Mixed economic system, which means the government does do something to keep the economy under control. Remember, it's very important for people's lives and their well-being, how the economy does, whether it does well or whether it goes into crisis and then bust and a depression, or this needs to be kept under control, and the government uses its economic policy to control the economy. This normally is done in a budget. It's operated with tax and spend, but also in different times they can use different instruments, and we'll talk about those, to change the direction of the economy. First of all, you've got to understand why the economy needs to be, and when the economy needs to be changed. This is the GDP, so this is all the output on this axis. We've got all the output, and this is over the time. This is an economic cycle, so all the output, remember the economy is the production of goods and services, so this production goes up over time and then down. It goes in cycles. We have booms and also busts. Now, the important thing for the government is to keep this oscillation, this movement up and down, as stable as possible, as much as possible in a continuous line. We want to increase the output, the economy, but we don't want to go too high and too low. Because if we go too high, we get problems. We get here at the top in this boom when everybody's buying and selling a lot, there's a lot of economic activity. You get the problems of maybe inflation. And then that can lead, if it goes too high, it can lead to a big bust. Here we can see the problems of unemployment when people are not selling and opening businesses and buying things. There's no economic activity. Suddenly people are losing their jobs. And people's wages are going down, and people's earnings are going down, and their savings maybe are losing value, etc., etc. So we need to avoid these booms and busts. So obviously the government, when it goes up, it needs to have an economic policy that can bring the economy down a bit and make it go a bit slower. And when it's down, it needs an economic policy which can increase economic activity. And so over the long term, have a stable growth. We need a stable growth. When we have growth, we've talked in the past, when we have growth, we see developments. We see, we go into maybe a renewable economy, a cyclical economy, renewable energy, etc. We see developments in technologies and medicine, and suddenly people have more time off, more holidays. So well-being goes up. So we do want to increase. Now, what can the government do? It can try to change aggregate demand. We've said aggregate demand is all the demand in the economy. So all the people wanting goods and services, and it can do that through government expenditure. So it can spend more or spend less. When it spends more, if it spends more on projects or maybe on people's wages, etc., or gives grants to different businesses or individuals, or schools, etc., then we see more economic activity, more growth, because there's more circulation of money in the economy. People demand more. So you've got this demand side policies. Or if it spends less, obviously there's not much money around, there's not much circulation of money in the economy. Suddenly there's no projects, there's no activity, and maybe you do see a bit of a crisis, inactivity. We can look here, the first picture represents a boom with lots of activity. The second picture, a bust when there's no activity. So that's just demand side policies can be spending, but it can also be affected by taxation. The government can tax more. We see this picture represents the government asking more money and so taking money out of the economy. So there's less demand in the economy if they're paying it to the governments. Or it can cut taxes. It can reduce taxes and so leave more money in the economy and keep aggregate demand high, or increase aggregate demand. If it cuts taxes, people will have more money to spend, and then there'll be higher aggregate demand, more activity, more economic activity. So these are called demand side policies. Also, demand side policy could be changing interest rates. We've talked a little bit about that. The government, the central bank, can reduce interest rates, and then it's a market. People, if they see interest rates go down, maybe they borrow more and maybe invest it or spend it on holidays or on a house. Maybe there's more mortgages, so more people buying houses, etc. So when the interest rates go down, we can see more demand in the economy, and then you get more jobs, the economy goes faster. Alternatively, they can put the interest rates up and you get less demand, less spending, and then less jobs but less inflation. Because there's less demand for things, prices don't go up so fast. Remember the market forces. More demand means higher prices. So those are demand side policies that they can change. They also can change the supply side policies. They can get more supply into the economy. So businesses can supply more products and services. For example, they can give subsidies to companies to increase their productivity, like robots. Maybe a company can invest in robots. If the government spends on subsidies for businesses, then the supply will go up. Or maybe training, more research, more training for people, so the supply can go up. And that can have an effect. That can increase economic activity. When supply goes up, prices come down and people buy more. Alternatively, if they want to slow the economy, they can do less. Maybe there's too much, the economy is going too fast, and they want to slow it a little to stop the inflation. So they maybe give less help. Another supply side policies would be taxing wages and profits differently. Remember, when there's less taxes on profits or wages, people work harder, they have more incentives, they want to work hard. If I know I can earn a lot more money, maybe I do more hours in my job. But if they increase taxes, maybe I think, oh, it's not worth, doing an extra hour, or maybe for a business, it's not worth opening a factory, etc. So taxes have a big effect on supply side policies. We can, or regulations. Here we've got red tape. We can say red tape is bureaucracy. So if there's lots of regulations, it can stop the supply of products and services. It means, that supply will go down. The more bureaucracy there is, the more regulations, the more problems. Businesses have to maybe do certain things to open a new factory. Lots of inspections, lots of changes, maybe to employ people. They have to train them on health and safety. If there's lots of health and safety regulations, they might not decide to expand. So that can affect the supply. Okay, so supply side and demand side policies are just labels that are important that we use. But we use fiscal and monetary policy more to describe specific policies. Fiscal policy is specifically to describe demand side policy, but also supply side policy too. Fiscal policy just means tax or spend. Any changes in taxation or spending is called fiscal policy. And here we can say, changes in more tax and less spending will bring the economy down. Like I said, for supply and demand side reasons, or the alternative, spending more and taxing less will bring it up. So you've got that for the fiscal policy. Here we've got the idea of an expansionary fiscal policy is when you want the economy to grow. So you put money into the economy, changing your taxation and your spending. And contractory fiscal policy is when you want the economy to slow down. Maybe it's going too fast, there's inflation, you want it to slow down, and so you maybe tax more and spend less, and that will contract the economy. That's called contractionary fiscal policy. Monetary policy is a term used to talk about the money supply. So if the government wants to control the economy using a monetary policy, it will try and change the supply of money. Maybe it will increase the supply of money or decrease the supply of money. For money in economics, we include debt. Debt is money. You spend debt. It's no different to the paper money. I mean, the government could call it debt or just print more money. It's the same thing. So monetary policy maybe means the government just, instead of printing money, it goes into more debt. One way to influence monetary policy, to create more money or debt, is to change the interest rate. This change of interest rate will change people's spending. It will change aggregate demand. So like I said before, if you've got low interest rates, people will borrow more, and that debt is money. And if you've got high interest rates, people will borrow less and then spend less because they won't have the debt. So that will change the economy, the activity in the economy by changing the supply of money through interest rates. Okay, so we've talked about that, interest rates, which changed the demand side, but also a bit on the supply side, because if you've got low interest rates, obviously you will build more factories. You will be prepared to invest more. Instead of keeping the money in the bank, if there's high interest rates, it's better to put the money in the bank than open an activity, maybe. If you get 10% in the bank and you only make 8% profit, put it in the bank, obviously. So that will affect supply and demand side. Yeah, so we have this quantitative easing, they call it in Europe. Quantitative easing. You can have printing more money, or you can have quantitative easing, which is basically buying bonds. In Europe, they decided to help Italy by buying Italian debt, which is a way of putting money into the system. Because if you buy Italian debt, then we can borrow more. If they're buying our debt, we're selling debt, so we're increasing the money in our system, even though it's debt. But it's the same effect. It's an expansionary monetary policy. You can print money if we had control. Italy doesn't have control over its money supply because it's part of a European monetary system. But if you did have control over money supply, you can either buy debt, put money into the system by buying more debt or having more debt, selling more, or just printing money and putting it in the system like that. So, okay. Yeah, so this talks about contractionary monetary policy, which is when you try and take money out of the system. You can do that by increasing the interest rates or cutting the money supply in any other way. And that would be to stop inflation, to reduce inflation. Okay, the last thing is exchange rate policy. Now, I'll talk more about this in the next video because this gets complex. But the government can have an influence on exchange rates. What we mean by exchange rate is how much the Italian money is exchanged for foreign money. Like, for example, the dollar versus the euro. How much the dollar is worth for how much dollars we can buy for a euro. This has a big effect on the economy. Obviously, if our euro is very cheap, the Americans can buy more Italian products and then our economy goes faster. You know, we have less unemployment and maybe a bit more inflation, but we're going faster. If, on the other hand, we reduce the amount of euros a dollar can buy by changing that, then we have more expensive products for Americans and they will buy less. of our products, and that will have an influence. So we live in an open economy where also the exchange rate has a big effect on the activity, the economic activity, and this could be a government policy, economic policy. And so the government can use interest rates, and I'll explain that after, but the government can use interest rates to change the exchange rate. And so change the economic activity, the speed of the economy, of the growth or of the contraction of the economy.